Hi, welcome to Beyond. I'm Amelia. I'm one of the community coordinators. Those of you that have been before should know my voice, my dulcet tones and my face by now. For those of you that are new, Beyond is a programme of free and funded design and digital training. It's been designed specifically for this moment in time during the crisis, during the continual kind of uncertainty and lockdowns, to help you boost your skills and adapt your services via design and digital. We also have some kind of specific subsectors that we give additional support to, which are financial wellbeing, early years, mental health and sexual and domestic violence. And there's absolutely loads of different free and funded trainings and support on the website. Today is the fourth in our 5-part training series. It's about rapidly testing ways to adapt services in fast-changing times, and it's with Louise, who is one of the innovation leads at Shift Design. So those of you that were with us last week will have met Teo, who's also from Shift, and Louise is kind of one of her co-workers and has a great innovation background. Thank you for joining us, Louise. We're really excited that you're here. I'm just going to give you a few reminders about how things are going to work today for those of you that haven't joined us. So this is a webinar. It means that Louise and I can't see your faces. We can only see each other. So, but we are really pleased to have you here, and we absolutely love it when you talk to us in the chat. As per usual, I'm going to be hanging out in the chat talking to people. We love to get some feedback, to hear how things are going, to hear your thoughts and your insights. So please make sure that you post things in there. And a reminder that you should post things to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see it and we can all join in the conversation together. And then just a reminder that we're going to be doing Q&A at the end. We'll squeeze in as many as we possibly can. So please use the Q&A function, which should be on the bottom of your screen, to get your questions ready for Louise, and then I'll be fielding them and sending them over to her. I'm going to talk to you briefly about accessibility now. So just a quick note that we are always trying to improve. And so we're aiming to offer the following accessibility support: image descriptions, captions, providing files in original format. So after this training this afternoon, at the end of the day, we'll put up a blog post which will have the video, the files, the templates and the slides. So you should be able to access them all there in the original format. And hopefully you'll be able to hear Louise well and clearly. If you want to use closed captions today, there should be the option on your screen, so you can just turn them on there. And I think that's everything from me. So I'm going to hand over to Louise, and I hope that you really, really enjoy the session. If you have any questions or you need anything, just post me a message in the chat and I'll jump in and help you out. Thanks so much. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Amelia said, welcome. I can't see or hear any of you. I'm keeping an eye on the chat bar here down at the bottom of my screen. So please do say hi and tell us who you are, maybe where you're from. Just all let's get acquainted, and I can feel like I'm in a room full of humans. Would be really nice for me, especially. And yeah, basically a little bit about me. So I'm a social researcher and designer at Shift, where we focus on helping organizations to play their best roles and work collectively in the fight against systemic social equity issues around childhoods, food systems, money, mental health, and especially around the area of people living on low incomes. A lot of my area specifically is around financial inclusion, financial well-being. We're really excited to be one of the organizations behind Beyond. Myself, I've spent the last 10 years working as a designer and a researcher, mostly across the digital product design and service design space, both commercial and social sides of things. So I've worked with partners like Vodafone, Zurich, Tesco, lots of local councils, housing associations, money and debt advisors, that kind of vibe. And there's two things that I'm obsessed with. The first is understanding people, and the second is making things that work for people. So that's why I'm here with you today. So one of my loves is the love of prototyping and experimentation to test products and services at an early stage to help maximize kind of impact, efficiency, resource, that kind of thing. And I'm really looking forward to talking you through this 1-hour training today, which focuses on running rapid experiments or tests using prototypes to help you, nonprofits, learn fast and adapt during times of crisis. We will have some dedicated Q&A time at the very end that Amelia is going to host. So if there are any questions that come up throughout the presentation, please do pop them into the chat bar, and Amelia will keep log of them, and we'll save some time at the end to answer some of those. Let's begin. So I'm going to try and convince you today that prototyping and testing can help you adapt your services in a way that saves money, saves time, saves energy, and helps you achieve your intended impact. So I'm going to start a little bit up front with the why, which is kind of the bit where I try and convince you about the value of prototyping, testing, experimentation. And then I'll move a bit more onto the practicalities, which is like kind of the what and how you do it, with lots of examples and a nice case study in there as well, to give some real life examples. So the context that we're working in right now is that people's realities are rapidly changing and access to support and services are reduced. Since we started Beyond back in October last year, we've built kind of a big community of nonprofit organizations focused on early years, financial well-being, mental health, sexual and domestic violence, and more outside of that, more generally. And I think what's apparent to me is we're hearing the same kind of stories and concerns coming up across the board over and over again. So things like we're tight on resources, we're tight on money, time, emotional energy, and there are really big challenges and knotty questions and problems that are facing us. So things like, how do we continue to deliver services in a non-contact or remote way? How do we keep services and interactions feeling human to maintain trust and relationships, you know, while things need to shift online or while we need to move physically away from people? How do we reach more people who can benefit from our services? How do we reach people who are digitally excluded? I know there's more than these, and I know these are just the kind of obvious general top level ones. But I think I'm kind of surfacing some of these is because I want to help kind of show you how prototyping can help you overcome some of these challenges, or at least build confidence about how you might overcome some of these challenges that you might be facing in your service delivery right now. So when there are ideas of what can be done to address a challenge, prototyping is something that can help you really move from an idea to something that can exist in the world quite quickly. So prototyping in itself helps you make your ideas tangible. It helps you do that quickly, so you can kind of work through kinks, gather feedback, and get to impactful solutions faster. Often organizations go straight from an idea to executing it, like they've got an idea and then they build it and put it in the world, and sometimes that goes wrong. And when it does go wrong, it costs money, it costs time, it costs energy, and it's wasteful. So let's look at some examples of those things. So putting things in the world without prototyping can first end up looking something like this, which is obviously a funny example. Or this happy accident that we often see with signage around different areas that we live in. Or this one as well, which is like one of the most day-to-day massive pet peeves for me as a Mac user. Every day new products and services are put into the world without prototyping first. At best, these examples can be funny or happy accidents. And like the examples I showed you, if you search product fails on Google, you'll see tons of these kind of examples. But in reality, these accidents do lead to wasted time, wasted resource, and failure to achieve the intended effect or impact for customer or service users. The NHS COVID-19 app from last year is a more costly example. So the idea behind the app was that using Bluetooth on your smartphone, it could trace who you came into close contact with, and if any of those people had coronavirus symptoms, the app would then notify you and tell you to self-isolate. So it's quite a straightforward idea. They built the app, they launched the app. When it launched, it was realized that the app only recognized 4% of Apple iPhones. And that was because the operating system that Apple's iPhone uses is basically designed in a way so that when apps aren't being used, they go to sleep. And when apps are asleep, then Bluetooth is not activated. So their whole idea was based on the fact that Bluetooth could be used kind of in the background constantly. And what came to surface was that their massive assumption about that was incorrect, in fact false. And this wasted time, millions of pounds and more, obviously. So I kind of want to just stop here for a second. A little question for you. I can see Michael's angry about this. So yeah, I feel angry about these things too. can you think of a time where something was launched into the world without having achieved the intended effect? So have a think. This might be something in your organization. It might be something in another organization, but just take 30 seconds or a minute there while I have a little sip of tea, and just pop any answers that you have in the chat bar for anything you can think of about a time when something has launched into the world without achieving its intended effect. Exactly, test and trace. Capitalism. Great, okay. So right now we're needing to build and adapt services faster than ever to respond to the crisis. Prototyping and testing your ideas before launching them into the world helps you remove or reduce risk. So it helps you save time, it helps you save money, and it helps you save your emotional energy, which is what a lot of us are low on these days, especially people working in our sector. And then it can help us kind of prioritize and work smart and focus where we want to kind of channel those resources. So what is prototyping exactly? I want to step back slightly and contextualize this within the design thinking approach, because this is the focus of this 5-part course. So the double diamond, you might be familiar with if you've been to Fan or Teo's training modules in the course so far. This basically breaks down problem solving into 4 parts. It's the practice of getting out into the world to look for clues, evidence, and inspiration by paying attention to things happening outside of your organization. It's the practice of breaking down massive complex challenges into smaller chunks. It's the practice of testing your ideas quickly and dirty to help you decide what to run with and what to dump. It's also the practice of putting real things into the world as early as possible to see what doesn't work. You can do this in any order at any time. And I think the thing is, these, even though you've got a bit of a linear diagram here, these things don't have to be linear, and they're very powerful alone as well as they are together to help you detangle and make sense of any big challenge that you have. I often start at this bit. I'm aware that you can't see that I'm pointing at my screen, but the middle bit is what I'm pointing at, number 3, the bit that focuses on testing your ideas quickly. And this is because you already have ideas about what might work to adapt or improve your services. Yes, doing discovery research, ethnography, open inquiry can tell you things you might not know about the people that you serve. If you do have big unanswered questions, that is great and definitely useful methods to use. And we use it a lot in our work. I use it a lot in my work. But you do already have informed ideas as well. And that's because you're working with the people that you serve every day. And you can use prototyping as another kind of research, a method to test your ideas in a low risk, low cost way. So prototyping can actually be a real secret weapon in times where context is rapidly changing, when resource is low and when being adaptable is needed more than ever. So pause moment, a question for you. What is an idea that you're thinking about or working on right now that has potential for impact or service improvement? Write it down in a notebook or put it in the chat, or just keep it in mind. We're going to come back to it later. And this can be something brand spanking new, a big innovation idea, or it can be a small change to an existing service. It could be trying out a new channel or engagement tactic. It can be any size, any shape. But what is an idea that you have that you're thinking about working on right now that has potential for impact or service improvement? Yeah, one-on-one online mentoring, that's a good example. Yeah, different types of delivery across the spectrum, across online and offline. Yeah, these are all great ideas of things, of ideas that can help you test ways to solve your problems. So we've covered a little bit about the why of prototyping, and now I want to go into a bit about the what. So what is a prototype? To break it down, a party. I said break it down, and I started thinking about going to a party, and so I was about to say a party is 3 things, but a prototype is 3 things. It's a question or assumption you have relating to your idea. It's an experience or physical artifact that you mock up to put in front of people to answer that question or to test that assumption. And it's one or more real people to test with, ideally in context of how they would use the thing that you're trying to test with them. Prototyping is important because you'll never get true feedback telling people about how great your new experience is, or showing them a slide deck. This is why we have to kind of simulate the services we're creating, or the parts of the services we're thinking about changing, in a way that's experienceable for the people we're designing for, the service users, at a really early stage. And I've got a few real life examples to show you of how prototyping has been used to answer a specific question or check if an assumption is being made, if it is in fact true. So the first example I'm showing you is one from the online shoe retailer Zappos. So when Zappos first started out, they knew that there was one massive assumption baked into their idea of an online shoe store. So this is back at the time when people didn't buy shoes online. We went to the shop and bought them. So this assumption that people will buy shoes online was core to their value proposition, that real humans would buy shoes that they wanted to sell online. So Zappos basically created a really simple web page that had photos of shoes on it, along with a payment function for customers to actually buy those shoes. The trick was, when a customer did actually go onto that website and buy something, the guys who ran Zappos literally went down to their local shoe shop, bought those shoes, packaged them up in Zappos packaging and sent them themselves. They didn't actually own any inventory, nor did they have any sort of legitimate supply chain. They were purely testing genuine customer appetite in one of the cheapest, best and quickest ways possible to test it. So the tactic used by Zappos is what's commonly called basically Wizard of Oz. And it's essentially prototypes that look like the real thing, but are essentially smoke and mirrors. Obviously Zappos are a massive company now, so their assumption was correct. People did want to buy shoes online. This is another example, one from our work at Shift, and a project that I did a lot of work on called Family Feeds. So a couple of years ago, we, as in our work in kind of healthy eating and kind of obesity, we wanted to test the assumption that parents on a low income are interested to buy healthier takeaways. So really targeting parents who are already spending a lot of money and using takeaway meal services as their main type of way to get dinner for them and their kids. And we wanted to see would they be interested in healthier takeaways. So what we did, again, instead of setting up an entire takeaway service, we decided to set up some pretty basic, you can see from my imagery there, some pretty basic Facebook ads advertising this idea of proper dinners as takeaway. So something that might be a hot family meal that you would make at home yourself, but that gets delivered to your door at an affordable price, the same or less than what you would pay for kind of a standard takeaway. And then we would promote that to parents at dinner time. Like when we were actually able to do this, what we would do is kind of use that Facebook ad to send them through to a dummy website, which of course, you know, there was no real service behind it. So we would say, we're really great, you're interested in this. This is coming to your area soon. If you want it, like, let us know if you're interested, which then also helped us kind of build up more data informed insights about the desirability of a service like this for our target service user. This is another very techie example, but one who, so if you've been to any of Teo's training so far, she was here last week and in week one. This is a project that we worked on with Google X, and they were interested in detecting signs of postnatal depression in new mums. And basically new mothers, they wanted to test the assumption that new mothers would be willing to wear an EEG headset to detect signs of postnatal depression. So instead of, again, building that headset straight from the off, they got some mums together and asked them to wear a non-functioning cap like a swimming hat with a strap on it almost. And they asked them to complete a task for 15 minutes, which was the time it would take to detect signs of postnatal depression. That this is an example of something that was an assumption proved wrong, because what they noticed was that parents with small children just were not able to sit for 15 minutes completely still while their children were with them. And this is an example called a Universal Credit Survival Pack. So this is one that I'm going to go a little bit deeper into later with a case study, but we had a big question, which is working with our housing association partner, One Manchester. We wanted to know if we sent a universal credit survival pack to tenants who had just signed up for universal credit and were about to kind of enter into their 5-week wait, would they phone up and request a rent adjustment while waiting for their universal credit? So what we did was printed out a checklist for tenants who had just claimed, and we posted it to them, and then tracked how many people phoned up over a 4-week period. And the last example here of these quick examples before I go a bit deeper is Dropbox, so something that everybody's probably familiar with. And when Dropbox was first getting started, they really were interested in, they had the assumption that people are interested in storing and sharing files online. Again, years back before it's kind of a current behavior that we all do now. So they basically, again, use that kind of smoke and mirrors, Wizard of Oz technique, and create an explainer video and a sign-up form. And what they did was posted it to Reddit, where they had a hunch that that's where a lot of their target audience would be spending their time. And they literally overnight earned 60,000 people who had signed up. So they knew that this was something that their target customer group wanted. So in the examples I talked you through, you'll have seen that prototyping is never really for prototyping's sake. And often what we're doing is making quick, lightweight mock-ups of things to kind of emulate the experience for people, to get them to feel like what it's like. And that will always test an assumption or answer a question with real people, kind of ideally in context. These 3 components are not only the makeup of what a prototype is, but they're also kind of the how-to guide for doing it yourself as well. So the how-to of prototyping is know what you're testing, test small and test early, and test with real people. The first step is know what you're testing. So every idea has assumptions baked into it. Every single idea, you've kind of got your known knowns, things that you know are true, and then you've got things that you're assuming that you're true. So every idea has these things that you're assuming are true for your product or service idea to achieve its intended impact. Your test should be designed to test those biggest or riskiest assumptions, and those ones that are biggest or riskiest are normally the ones that you have least confidence about. So that's normally a good signal. And so think back to the examples I talked you through, like Zappos, who made an assumption that people would buy shoes online, or Dropbox, who made the assumption that people wanted to store and share files online. They were the ones that they needed to feel more confident about in order to move forward with putting any more resource, energy, or effort into building out their idea. So another pause moment, a question for you. Earlier, you wrote down an idea that you were thinking about or working on right now to improve your service impact. Now, I want you to write down, either in your notebook or in the chat bar, whichever you prefer, what might be 1 or 2 assumptions that are baked into that idea, the things that must be true to achieve the impact you desire. So you don't have to write down loads, 1, 2, 3 max maybe. I'll give you a minute. I'll take a tea break. So what are the assumptions baked into your idea? The things that must be true to achieve the intended impact. Once you've written down a couple of assumptions or questions, circle the one, just one, that feels the riskiest to you. The ones that you would feel least confident about? Yeah, so Michael, yeah, parents of teens are looking for some sort of meaningful online connection for their children. That's a huge one. There's definitely an assumption there, and also that teens will want to connect online with a mentor. Exactly, they're two big assumptions. Drew as well, Vicky, all really, really good assumptions coming in here. Stacey, exactly. People are able to find us. People can actually sign up online. Exactly. These are all great, perfect examples. This is it. The second step is to test small and test early. So a prototype should be built to test your highest priority assumptions, nothing more. So it's all about starting as small and lightweight as possible, avoiding bells and avoiding whistles. And this is my favorite part about prototyping, because it doesn't have to be fancy. It's kind of like permission to do things in a very no bells, no whistles way, kind of almost as scrappy and rough and ready as possible once you're getting once you're finding a way to accurately test that assumption or hypothesis. The aim is to test and learn quickly. So you must be prepared to change your idea. And that's what a really important part in here is. You're not looking for self-validation or to prove that your idea is right. You're looking to test whether your assumptions are right, or to get some answers to your questions to help you think about what to do next. So thinking back to some of the examples I gave, like how when we at Shift wanted to know more about if parents on low income who bought takeaways a few times a week were interested in buying healthier versions, we knew the assumption, and we tested small. So we created those dummy Facebook ads and tracked how much parents would click it through to our dummy website. We wanted to build confidence in our idea before investing any more time and money with things which are always scarce. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of fidelity. So think about this. If you don't know whether people need a wheel at all, go with the lowest possible fidelity to get feedback about the desirability of the concept as a whole. So having confirmed that they do want a wheel, increase the fidelity to what kind of wheel they might need. Should it have spokes? Should it have a tire? How big should it be? Only after having gone through a few rounds of this to understand the necessary features and attributes should you go to a higher fidelity, which tests for things like look and feel. So when a prototype is sufficiently low fidelity, users will feel permission and feel free to give really honest feedback, or even like grab a marker to it, fix certain things right away themselves. This is the kind of participation that you want from the people that you're designing for. You're starting to get them to co-design with you then and give you suggestions of things you might not have even thought about. And there's nothing better than being able to come back to somebody you're testing something with a second iteration, showing them what you've changed based on the feedback that they've given you. Prototyping at too high fidelity too early will get you feedback about look and feel, or where a certain button should be, but not whether your strategic direction and your intention for impact is right. The earlier you prototype and test your ideas, the lower the cost of making changes as you learn what is and isn't working. So if you need to convince anybody, yourself, anybody in your organization, that it's worth doing research and low fidelity prototyping, this is the argument that tends to win them over. So too often we see companies spending months and tens or even hundreds of thousands on building something that once they finally put in front of customers, service users, their people, their communities, just simply isn't quite right. But if they had tested the concept properly in the early stages, they could have learned whether their assumptions were true or false and pivoted easily. You should only increase the fidelity of your prototypes and tests as your certainty and confidence increases. So when you're testing the core concept or proposition and whether people actually want it, always start with low fidelity. So as your confidence then increases, that your assumptions are true, that's when you can start to increase fidelity and start looking at how variations in design or delivery, or specifics around usability and things like that. And this brings me on to my third step, which is to test with real people. So prototyping helps you understand not what people say they do, but what they actually do. So when you test in context, you can observe real or close to real behavior. A question for you again. So going back now to the assumption that you circled earlier, the one that you said feels riskiest or that you're least confident about in your idea, quickly jot down one or two small, light, low fidelity ways you could test this assumption, and who you could test this with and where. So either write these down on your paper or pop them in the chat. Think about the examples I gave of different types of prototypes earlier on. So could you make a really quick video? Could you simulate an experience by phone call or WhatsApp? Could you mock up some social ads or dummy web pages? What is the lightest way that you could simulate the experience for people to quickly see if your assumption is true or false? Okay. I'm going to talk you through a quick case study just to get a little bit deeper on this. So this is an idea I've been working on with a team at Shift and with our partner One Manchester, a housing association in Manchester, and it's the Universal Credit Survival Pack. So together, following an immersive research phase with them, we created a brief to prototype and test ways to support tenants through the 5-week wait. So between claiming universal credit and then receiving their first payment, which takes about 5 weeks, but we know can be longer. As I talk through this case study, just keep an eye out for a couple of things, 3 things specifically. The assumptions or questions we were testing, how we tested small and early, and how we tested with real people. So we knew from the initial research with One Manchester's tenants who had just moved on to universal credit that the 5-week wait until the first payment is where debt can build really rapidly for people. So whether that be from taking loans to cover costs or missing payments of rent and bills. And even though service provision is sometimes available to support people during that 5-week wait, tenants didn't always know about or trust this support. So we kind of had this grounding insight, which was that the wait until the first universal credit payment is when debt can build rapidly for tenants. We know that there's support available for tenants like payment breaks on rent, access to bills, and like energy vouchers and things to help with your bills, basic food supplies, counselling support, that kind of stuff. There often are some things there, but tenants don't always quite know this support is there and that it's available. And this led us to our impact hypothesis, which was a universal credit survival pack would enable tenants to take proactive control to manage changes when they moved onto UC, minimizing new debt buildup and also building awareness of the support available to them. So this was our question. What if we delivered a universal credit survival pack to tenants as soon as we get notified about their claim, which housing associations do? It would include everything they need to make the wait time easier, all in one place, which would include a promise to pause or adjust rent to help ease outgoings through that time, a checklist of payment breaks offered by utility providers that are often used by those tenants, vouchers for emergency basics like food, and also free advice if needed, if, for example, debt is a bit of an issue and there is some more professional advice needed. There were many assumptions baked into this idea. So, for example, that tenants would use the supermarket voucher. This was kind of a proxy for us that they would even open the UC survival pack in the first place. That they would actually call up and instigate a rent break or a rent adjustment. And then if they even got past those steps, they might then even accept the offer of money and debt advice or even employment support in a more kind of like less urgent or immediate view. But this was just a few of many, many assumptions that we had at the time. And the ones that we believed must be true for this idea to achieve its attended impact of minimizing debt buildup specifically during that 5-week wait, were that tenants would open their UC survival pack. So we tracked usage of supermarket vouchers as a proxy for open rates, and that tenants would engage with One Manchester. So we tracked the number of calls to the phone number on the pack, which was set up specifically for this test. As well as the number of tenants who opted for a rent adjustment or a rent break. And then we also kept an eye on some of the other things we were interested in, like the number of people who accepted the offer of debt advice, or people who wanted support doing a benefits check, for example, as we knew we were also interested in them, and the test setup kind of allowed for it. So with these assumptions prioritized, we agreed that we would prototype the UC survival pack. So this is an example of what the first prototype looked like that we started sending out to tenants. And when you open it up, it included a £10 supermarket voucher for their nearest Tesco or Asda, information about hyperlocal support services that offer emergency basics like food banks, libraries, counselling, and a call to action to reach out to One Manchester for that immediate rent adjustment if needed. The prototype was not high tech at all. I'm hoping that if I click this video will play. Yeah, there we go. This is basically just to show you basically how low fidelity it was in the first kind of instance. I hope you can hear me over the light noise of the video. But it was basically just a printout and an envelope, a printout envelope and a voucher, and a leaflet insert inside. The most interesting thing, so the most time-consuming thing, interestingly, was actually just writing the copy, writing the words that would go into that checklist. So we printed and packed 60 of these, which was about how many tenants One Manchester expected to make a new claim for universal credit over a 4-week period, which we would then send out this pack to every single one of those. The test was integrated into One Manchester's standard UC first response, which is usually a phone call from the rents team to the tenants to let them know that they're aware of the change in circumstance, though a phone call that many tenants never actually answered at all in their normal kind of first response circumstances, which makes kind of sense because they'd just lost a job or they'd had a change in circumstance and claimed universal credit, so they're probably worrying about paying their rent. So the pack was basically sent after a first attempt to call that tenant was made by the rents team to both tenants who answered the call from the rents team and those who didn't answer the call from the rents team. And over a 4-week period, test period across February to March in 2020, last year, we posted 57 packs to 57 tenants who made those new universal credit claims, along with a text to let them know that a pack was on the way. And so here's what we kept track of: open rate with voucher usage as a proxy, number of calls to the UC helpline that was set up for the test to see how many people would make that rent adjustment, and number of engagements with their One Money team, which is basically their kind of benefit and debt advice, general financial advice support team. For the 5-week test period, we basically logged who the packs were sent to, if they used their vouchers, if they phoned up, and if they adjusted their rent, as well as who opted for kind of benefits or money advice as well. Again, really low tech. It was just a Google sheet. That's all it was. And we would update this every single day. It would take half an hour. What we saw was that 37% of tenants the 37% of tenants normally do answer that first call from the rents team. And over the period of the test, the number of tenants who engaged with One Manchester increased to 79%. So based on the 57 who received the pack, that's what that percentage is out of. And this included tenants who had already answered the standard practice call before the pack was sent, as well as those who answered after or phoned up themselves. But you could start to see there quite a significant increase in the number of people who were engaging with One Manchester in a way that One Manchester really wanted them to, which was to help people know that they could do that rent break. So out of that period of the test, 37 out of 57 rent adjustments were agreed, which was 65% of all tenants who were sent the pack. So the number of rent adjustments agreed before the pack was sent was 14. So we moved from 25% to 65%. So again, you can start to see real data to start kind of backing up your assumptions, data that's just captured in phone calls and spreadsheets. Most tenants who engaged had good rent accounts. And so this told us that tenants with high arrears or erratic payments in their rent didn't really engage despite the promise of a free supermarket voucher and unconditional support. And only 42% of people did in fact use their vouchers, which we're taking as a proxy for the number of people who open their packs. So even though the team felt that this was significant achievement, there was also some insight there that, you know, half the packs were left unopened. And the team at One Manchester suggested this may be due to fear or worry of engaging while being behind on rent, especially with people who had those kind of more erratic or high arrear rent accounts. And so as we would think forward, then one of the next things that went on the plan to do at that time was to start thinking about how we could test sending packs maybe in partnership with trusted local organizations to encourage higher open rates, or to maybe adjust the messaging to emphasize that One Manchester's objective was really to support people to sustain their tenancies and keep them secure in their home. So this brings me to my last point. I hope you're still with me, which is be prepared to change your idea. So as you'll see within that test, there are things that our assumptions were right, and there were things that our assumptions were wrong. And you will get things wrong. And that's the benefit of low fidelity early prototyping, because you can figure out which of the assumptions baked into your idea are in fact true and which are not, before then spending lots of time, money, and energy on actually building them and putting them into operation. You can learn what works and what doesn't work. So a few points that I'm going to leave you with to remember, I think important for me, is a prototype is not a pitch. So if you're up for and excited to try out some of this stuff, so a bit of experimenting, testing, making some really light, low fidelity prototypes, the point is not to try and sell or explain your concept, but to let people experience it and invite their feedback. You really want to find out if the assumptions baked into your idea that must be true for you to achieve your intended impact are in fact true or not. And the way I do that is by continually isolating assumptions to test one thing at a time, literally just one at a time. And this will help you to decide whether to continue or pivot before investing too heavily. Prototyping is just one series of techniques for understanding whether your product or service is on the right track. So between prototyping, piloting, and doing MVPs, minimal viable products or minimal viable services, each is equally important. I love all three, but they have to come in the right order, so that we can establish desirability, feasibility, and viability in that logical order. So like similarly, like quantitative research is really important and has its place, but it doesn't make much sense before qualitative research has been done to understand what it even is that we're trying to learn. Lo-fi prototyping takes courage. It's really difficult to make something rough and ready and show it to people, whether it's a colleague or a person who uses your services, and, you know, open yourself up to that feedback from people. And obviously, like, it's not about us, you know, the critique isn't coming to the person, like it's about the product, the service, or idea, and that's really important to remember. But it does take courage. So if this is something that you're up for, yeah, be brave and do it. It's really, really fun. So I'm going to stop there and ask Amelia to rejoin and see if we've got any questions that I can help to answer.
Thanks so much, Louise. We've got loads of questions, so I'm glad we stopped with plenty of time. If anyone's got any to add as we talk them through, please get them in the Q&A as quickly as possible so that I can pick them up. There's a few that have been floating around the chat that I'm going to come to quickly, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So Michael asked a while ago about ethical considerations of offering a kind of non-functioning product or experience. So I guess particularly around the Wizard of Oz things, kind of how do you deal with that ethically? And he's also asked in the Q&A about the language that you might use around it when you're explaining that there isn't actually a product there. I think they kind of go together.
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I guess there's a couple of things, but I think I always think, so I studied psychology back in the day, so I was like, had the ethics drilled into my mind about any sort of research question. And one thing that I always think about is what is the potential benefit or risk to taking part in this experiment with these kind of people. So if you've got something like Zappos, which is an online shoe shop, if they're taking part in something that's Wizard of Oz, they're going online, buying a pair of shoes, and they're actually getting their shoes. Like, there's little ethical risk there. There's little potential risk or damage, psychological damage to a person, because they think they're getting something and then they're getting it. I guess something that's a little bit more like the EEG cap that we talked about with Google X, that's a little bit more of example where you might want to be a little bit careful, because you're talking about things like postnatal depression, detecting signals, potentially talking about treatment. So that's an example where I would make sure people have like real full informed consent of something like that, that is really explained to them up front. This is the purpose of this test, and this is why we're asking you to take part in it. This is what we're going to learn out of it, and you have total choice of participation as to whether you want to help us learn that, and oftentimes keeping people informed about what you're learning as well. But typically, I think, I don't want to say ethics isn't something I get too bogged down by, but a lot of the time when we're testing very early stage things, we're more looking at things in service areas that have less potential psychological risk, but definitely one to consider as you go.
Thanks, Louise. I think that's probably resonated with a few people. I've seen Stacey say that colleagues are kind of worried about the concept of a draft. And actually on a really similar kind of point, Susan said that kind of she has a concern around quick and simple prototyping tarnishing reputations. So wondering about whether there's a way in which you'd involve kind of a partner or do co-design rather than necessarily do a kind of simple prototype that could have that impact.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it actually just made me realize they didn't answer the second part of your question about like what language you might use if people are engaging in prototypes. And I think this is a thing that comes up hugely, especially when we work with partners, and it comes down to that concept of being a bit courageous, but you have to balance that with reputational risk, obviously. And I think one example is when we did the family feeds, we wanted to test whether parents would buy healthier versions of takeaway, and we set up the Facebook ads. What we did is we didn't pretend it was real. Once they clicked on it, we told them the full story immediately, and we said, we're so excited that you clicked on this. Like, we used really positive language, and we're really excited to potentially build this service for you if you're interested in it. We've done this experiment on Facebook to see how many parents would click, and if we get enough people interested, we're going to set it up for you. So like, you can really frame that in a positive way, and even use it as an opportunity to collect email addresses for potential people who might like to further co-design that with you, engage in conversations, give you feedback on the phone or in person about the ideas that you're thinking of. So that's one thing about kind of language and reputational risk. Like, you can just be really, really honest about what you're doing and why you're trying it and what you think the benefit is for the people who are kind of engaging in that light experiment or giving you that feedback. And definitely there's an option to partner with kind of local trusted providers as well. I think it's always going to come back to what I was saying during that presentation. I think the point I'm always trying to land is it's all about testing assumptions. So it's always in the lightest possible way. So if you feel like you're getting to a point where something's feeling really big and dangerous to test and potentially a huge reputational risk, I would question, are you actually just testing one assumption there? Make sure you're isolating that down to one assumption, because it's likely that if you're testing one thing at a time, especially in that earlier low fidelity stage, you're testing with kind of individuals or really small groups where that kind of risk is lower. And once you're starting to test with like bigger groups of people, that's where you've probably got to a point where you're feeling pretty confident about your service offer and what it is that you're offering, at which case the risk starts to reduce because you're building confidence that you're offering something that people want.
Thanks. I've got a quick one on language again, which has come from someone anonymous in the Q&A, but which is asking if you use the term like an experiment to describe, if you would use that to describe, for example, a Wizard of Oz website publicly.
So I wonder, is that kind of a word, are you saying, is that a word that we would use to people actually we're running the test with? Good question. Typically I don't, and it's probably language I more use in situations like this when I'm talking about it, and the idea of like experimenting, because it kind of gets you in the mind set of understanding what it is, which is trying something out or testing one thing compared to another thing. But typically, no, I would never use academic terminology like experiment when explaining. I would try and really use plain language and say something like, where we've got an idea of this service, and we're putting it out there and making ads to see how many people click on it, and that will give us an idea of how many people are interested in it, and if we find there are enough people interested in it, then we might do more, or we will do more, like let us know if you'd like to learn more about it over time. But really just explaining the process rather than using a word like experiment, because that's probably where you're going to start freaking people out.
We've had quite a few questions about budget actually. So Stacey in the Q&A, and also I'm trying to think about Sadaf has asked us in the chat around kind of how you would navigate budgets and spending in the kind of prototyping phase, and I guess balance that against physical development costs, for example, or kind of.
Yeah, this is a huge one. This is such a huge one, because often when we're working with partners or testing our own products and services that we build at Shift, I guess the kind of more traditional way of thinking about it is you might have like like a research budget to go and like do research or plan something, but then the main bulk of your budget is at that stage of build. So whether it's a website, a digital product, or a physical, I don't know, shop, whatever it is, you typically have a hefty budget at that stage. So it kind of depends on the culture of your organization and how budgets are normally broken down. But that's where I would really get into that argument of, if you remember that slide I had earlier on that talked about kind of how if you spend money on prototyping earlier, you're more likely to save money in the long run. So to be honest, I think it's more going to be a conversation, a bit of a convincing job for whoever is the budget holder on those pieces of work, and trying to explain to them that if we invest a certain percentage of that money up front to test things in a really rapid and light way, that it means that the spend for the build later on is actually going to be reduced. So it's less about saying, can we have more budget? Can we have new budget to prototype? And it's more saying, we've got the entire budget for the project. Can we look at how we want to spread that across the different phases? And likewise, research, open inquiry, discovery research also normally gets a bit of hefty budget. So it might be saying, okay, well, instead of spending all that money doing discovery research and all that money doing build, maybe let's do a little bit of discovery research, but then take a part of that budget and start making and testing things as fast as possible. Or likewise from the other way. But it's really about trying to convince whoever the budget holder is to spread that out. And I always use the argument of like, what is it? Like a picture paints 1,000 words and a prototype paints 1,000,000 words, or whatever it is. But you're going to get so much more confidence in whether you're building the right thing when you can actually start to observe people's behavior instead of relying on what they say they do. So we all know that people say they do what they do, but in reality they often behave in different ways, and what prototyping can help you with is to see those behaviors. So yeah, budget spread would be my idea on that.
And actually next week, I'm going to do a little plug here. Next week on the training, Rebecca's going to talk us through kind of building a product roadmap, and part of that is about bringing people on the journey with you. And I think we have some other resources on Beyond that are like around relational coaching and a digital product management course, which are much more hands-on and really go into some of that Louise has talked about, and the kind of persuading and bringing your team on the journey with you. Louise, have you got time for a couple more questions? We've got 5 minutes left on the webinar. Awesome. Okay, I don't want to keep sending you millions until you're stressed. So I wanted to ask you if you could explain a little bit more about the kind of the idea about feasibility and viability, that kind of slide that you had the process of prototyping, pilot and MVP on. So that's just going to ask if you could tell us a bit more about the difference between those different stages.
Yeah, and this is, I'm gonna like have a vulnerable moment here and say this is where my like use, I'm good with like numbers and experiments, and I'm worse with language. So I always get my definitions mixed up. So instead of breaking down those exact words for you. I'm just going to talk about it in the context of prototyping, piloting, and minimal viable product. So definitely within that prototyping stage, you're trying to focus on desirability, which is basically like, do people want the thing that I want to make, or do people want the change that I want to make? So that's what that desirability thing is. Do people want it? And that's what you start getting through breaking down your assumptions. Once you have a product or service, a new one or a change that you have good confidence people want because you tested it in a low fidelity way, that's when you might work on piloting. And that's when you would test it kind of with a larger group of people, and maybe one entire cohort of people. And in that context, you're kind of saying, is this feasible? Does this work in a larger group? And then as you get to minimal viable product, that's basically going to market fast. So when you get into viability, you're really starting to ask questions of, can we make this work, like cost-wise as well? So like with larger groups. So I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Louise. I felt like it made a lot of sense. So hopefully it also said I felt like that. Stacey's asked us a question about whether or not you could use this design thinking in general, and particularly prototyping, for managing kind of internal projects or like change management internally, as well as the kind of more external products and services that we've spoken about.
Absolutely. This is why I love prototyping, because you can use it in any context. So right now, even within Shift, we're basically going through kind of a process where we've decided to move from being a hierarchical organization to a self-managing and self-organizing organization. So it's a proper organizational design, internal team operating structure, organizational structure project. And instead of us making a big plan, to basically say, this is what our ideal organizational design looks like, and then we try and design that in overnight, what we're saying is like, here are the assumptions that we think need to be true in order for us to work really effectively as a self-managing team, or in a self-organizing way that kind of decentralizes power and decentralizes decision making. And we're basically going through 3-month cycles of experimentation to see if the new ideas and ways of working that we have in mind will actually work for our team and our team members. So I would use it anywhere you can. You can even use it in your real life. Like, I don't know, if you're trying to get your partner to do something, you can be like, what would have to be true to get them to do this for me? And then you just try it out. But yeah, definitely any context it will work.
Thanks, Louise. I'm going to squeeze in one last question. Jonas asked if, like, in terms of engagement with test groups, do you have any advice on trying to engage with the communities that you would want to test the product with? So I guess trying to reach them.
Yeah, so great question. And this is always the hardest thing, is like, so going back to that slide of kind of like the 3 components that are involved in the prototype. So kind of knowing your question, your assumption, testing small, testing early, and testing with the right people. That is the third bit, making sure you're testing with the right people. So that's more important than testing with a random group. So it's basically like whatever you can to isolate who that target person is for who would use that. That's most important than testing with a random. And I think you're definitely at the low fidelity stage, you're really trying to go for qualitative and meaningful deep feedback over quantitative or mass feedback. So I would say, if in your normal day-to-day job you happen to have regular interactions with somebody who uses your service, building it into a chat that you're already having with them is a good idea. If you've got an email database of people within your organization who you know it, but maybe reach out to them that way, saying, we want to test something out, would you be up for taking part in it? If you have no access, if it's like a completely new user group, you might try something like what we did on Facebook or Instagram, where you can kind of do a demographic sample and test things that way, or potentially using a partner organization who might already work with your target user and testing it through an existing pool of people that your partner works with.
Thanks so much. We've got a few more questions and I'm really sorry, but I can't get to them. So a huge thank you for such interesting kind of thought-provoking questions, and a massive thank you, Louise, for talking us through your answers. I can see someone said thank you so much for showing your innovative way of doing things. That's the end of today's training. I think Louise has got another slide to show us about a workshop that we're running on Beyond, which is really specifically about prototyping and about testing. So it'd be a really amazing thing to take part in if you've enjoyed this session. It's been run by founders and coders. We're doing 3 of them and they're all in March, and they're about delivering a peer-led and collaborative kind of workshop on prototyping and usability testing. So the idea is that you will go to them with an idea you'd like to test, and they'll help you to create a simple wireframe, think about how to test kind of a current version of your website or content from social media or something like that, and they'll go through the process of creating that and conducting rounds of usability testing. So it's a really practical, hands-on way of, particularly for digital products, of you going out and testing things out. So you have to have joined this course today or have watched this course today back to join it. So it's going to be really relevant for all of you, and you can find that on the website. I think we'll probably drop in the chat a link to that in a moment. And then just to say that next week we're going to be back with the final one in this training series, turning your ideas into action. It's with Rebecca Birch, who is an amazing service designer, and she's a really calming, beautiful presence to finish the series with, so I'm looking forward to it. And she'll be talking us through that kind of real practical creation of effective roadmaps and bringing the leadership with you and turning the ideas that we've kind of thought about, created, started to test into a real action. So please join us next week. It's going to be a really fun interactive session. I think that's all I have left to say. Please check out the website, joinbeyond.org. Next week we'll finish this training course, but we've got absolutely loads of things about things like cybersecurity, digital product management, safeguarding online. So there's absolutely loads of opportunities to access some more free training. And of course, we'll put today's session online on the blog for you all to watch back and view the slides. The last thing from me is that I'm popping a feedback form in the chat. I know we actually do this every week, but it's really helpful for us. We practice what we preach. We want to learn from you about what you've enjoyed or not enjoyed and what we could do better and make this training even better next time we run it. So we'd really appreciate if you'd get involved and just feedback on a few of those questions. It should take a minute. That's all from us. Thanks so much for joining. We'll say goodbye, Louise. Thanks very much. And let's finish up. Thank you.